Good morning, everybody. I am DJ Riley, one of the hosts on Boys on the Bench, and I am back with 6 early bird NBA bets for these PrizePicks and Underdog daily fantasy sites. I will be making my picks based off of PrizePicks today, but again, they will typically always cross-platform to Underdog. Now, before we jump into this, make sure y'all are hitting the subscribe button and notification bell because we are dropping videos daily. If you have not seen our NFL bets video from yesterday, make sure you're checking that out because lines are always changing. Also, make sure you're checking in the links in the description because in there you will find a link to our X profile where we are posting all of our bets there as well. Down there, you'll also find another positive EV betting tool called Daily Grind Fantasy. Daily Grind Fantasy has created such a strong community amongst solid bettors who are using the same method and creating the same slips that they do for you, telling you what you need to do and what the percentage odds are used to hit on these optimizer bets. So anyways, let's go ahead and jump into these 6 bets for today. First on this list is Jalen Green going over 17.5 points versus the Charlotte Hornets team. Looking at his history, he does have a 1-game history versus this team. Earlier this season on November 1st, he did get 23 points, which would have easily cashed this over for him. And he does have 3 career games versus this Hornets team. And in all 3 of those games, he has gone over in every single one of them. Now, looking at what Daily Grind Fantasy is giving us at positive EV value, they're giving this a 50.2% chance of hitting with an average juice of minus 115. So again, they're saying that this isn't really have any positive EV value here, but I still do like this play. If we look at his recent performances, he has only hit this in 2 out of his last 5 and 4 out of his last 10. So again, not great performances if you look at it in just kind of that 2 out of 5, the 40% amongst his last 5 and 10 games. But in this most recent game versus the Trailblazers, he led the Hornets with 29 points. Now, if we also look at whenever he gets at least 1 day of rest, he has hit his overs in 13 out of 23 games, which is about 60% of the time. So he is getting a day of rest coming in versus this Charlotte's team, who he has had very good success with in the past. Now, if we look at how Charlotte ranks versus shooting guards, they do allow the 10th least amount of points to that position. But again, Jalen Green has continued to find ways to get it done versus this team, and he's coming off a very dominant performance. So I do like him in this matchup. I feel like the books have bumped his line quite down to 17.5 for him, so giving us that advantage again. Now, moving on to the next pick, we're staying in the same game, and that's LaMelo Ball going over 26.5 points versus the Houston Rockets. Again, has that 1-game history versus the Houston Rockets. In that game, November 1st game, he only had 19 points, so would have missed this by quite a bit. Now, if we're looking at what Daily Grind Fantasy is giving us, they're giving this a 51.9% chance of hitting with an average juice of minus 124. So it's decent odds sitting somewhere around that 52%. But again, when you look at Daily Grind Fantasy, you want to see somewhere that's around that 54%, and anything above that is even better. So 52 is we're getting close, but we're still not where we need to be, but it's decent odds in terms of positive EV. Now, looking at his recent performances of his last 5 and last 10, he has hit this in 2 out of his last 5 and 6 out of his last 10. Now, if we look at his last 15, he has also hit 10 out of his last 15. So he's definitely been on a cold stretch these last 2 games where we only see him averaging 17.5 points. However, what I do like is his volume. Over those 2 games, he has been averaging 19.5 field goal attempts. So his volume is there. He's just not having shots fall. But looking at how this Houston defense is versus point guards, they have allowed 3 out of the last 4 point guards who have had 20-plus point projections to hit the over in the month of January. Also, looking at how Houston ranks over point guards in general, they allow the 8th most points. So they do a bad job at defending the guard position, and especially in the month of January, allowing 3 out of those 4 to go over with 20-plus point projections. So again, I like LaMelo Ball. He's had a rough stretch of games these last 2 games, but his volume is still there, so I do expect him to figure this out, and life without Terry Rozier. He's lost a guard with a lot of usage, so again, I think that that's where we're going to start to see him really try to take over this offense. But let's move on to the next pick, and again, it is the 3rd pick in this same game. This is going to be a game that I will be sweating all day today, but that's Jabari Smith Jr. going over 8.5 rebounds versus the Charlotte Hornets team. Again, has that 1-game history November 1st. where we did see him only get 6 rebounds. Now, if we look at positive EV and what they're giving him, Daily Grind Fantasy is giving him a 50.4 chance of hitting with an average line of minus 116. So again, nothing special in terms of positive EV here. Looking at his recent performances of his last 5 and last 10, he has hit it in 2 out of his last 5 and 6 out of his last 10. Now, the last 10 power forwards that have faced this Charlotte Hornets team, 6 of them have hit the over, and the 4 that missed were all hooks, meaning that they missed by just half a rebound. So looking at what we really need from Jabari Smith Jr. here is we really need 33 minutes of play. Whenever he sees 33 minutes of play, he has hit 12 out of his last 15 games, and his season average in minutes is 35.7. So it is very attainable. Again, versus the Charlotte Hornets team, they are good versus defending against power forwards in the rebounds by allowing the 9th least. But I think Charlotte Hornets' recent performances and how they've done against power forwards in these last 10 matchups versus them have not been good. Again, they've all gone over, and the ones that missed have been only hooks. So again, I think Jabari Smith Jr. hitting 6 out of his last 10 and the matchups of which Charlotte has done versus power forwards in their last 10 have not been great. So again, looking for him to really just get that 33 minutes, hopefully hitting it, making it 13 out of his last 16 games. But let's move on to the next pick, and it is a new game finally, but that is Kawhi Leonard going over 10.5 rebounds versus plus assists versus this Toronto Raptors team. They do have a one-game history this season, January 10th, where we saw Kawhi Leonard only get 10 rebounds plus assists, 3 rebounds and 7 assists in that game. Now, looking at what Daily Grind Fantasy gives us in terms of positive EV, they are giving this a 52.5% chance of hitting with an average juice of minus 127. So again, decent odds in terms of positive EV, but not great, not sitting around that 54%. Now, looking at recent performances, he has hit this line in 4 out of his last 5 and 6 out of his last 10, with 2 of those games in his last 10 being hooks. He is coming off of a very dominant performance versus that Lakers team where we saw him go for 21 rebounds plus assists in that game. So again, if we can continue to see him build as a passer, how we have in these last 6 or so games where he's had at least 4 assists in those last 6 games, then I think we're going to be fine. If we can expect high assist numbers and then a couple rebounds here or there, which we know the claw Kawhi Leonard is very good at getting rebounds. So again, if we can expect high assist numbers like we've seen in recent history with him these last couple games, then I believe that we'll be sitting just fine. Now, if we look at how Toronto is versus forwards, they allow the 9th least rebounds plus assists to that position. But again, looking at how Kawhi Leonard has done in his last several games, with really 6 out of his last 10 and 2 of those being hooks, and again, coming off of that very dominant game versus the Lakers and how well he has done as a passer, I really like this matchup versus this Raptors team. But let's move on to the next pick, and that's Trae Young going over 39.5 points plus rebounds plus assists versus this Dallas Mavericks team. They do not have any history this season, but if you look at Trae Young's history, his career versus Dallas, he is 0-2 at hitting this mark versus this Dallas Mavericks team. Now, looking at positive EV and what Daily Grind Fantasy has given us, it's 51.8% chance of hitting the books with an average juice of minus 124. We do see one book favoriting this by bumping his line up to 40.5, indicating that this line is likely to move up as the day goes on, which is something that I really like because PrizePicks is one of the slower books to be on top of this. When other sports books, major sports books, are bumping it up. So make sure you're jumping on this. Looking at his recent performances, though, hasn't done too well. Out of his last 5 games, he's only hit this line 1 time. Out of his last 10, he's only hit it 4. Now, Dallas has struggled greatly versus stopping point guard efficiency. 8 out of the last 12 point guards have hit their over lines in January, which is a high number. Again, that's 75% of point guards in January have hit their over versus this Dallas team. The 4 that missed, 2 were hooks and 2 were by 2 points. So, yes, Trae Young has struggled recently, but so has Dallas versus his point guard position. So if you told me to put all of my money on one of these, I will put my money on Trae Young. I think that he will end up figuring it out versus this Dallas team that has struggled. Again, looking at Dallas and how they've done versus point guards, they've allowed the 16th most points plus rebounds plus assist to that position. Anyways, though, let's move on to the last pick of today, and that's Wendell Carter going over 11.5 points versus this Memphis Grizzlies team. They don't have any history this season, but Wendell Carter does have 2 career games versus Memphis, and in those 2 career games, he has hit the over in both of those games. Looking at what Daily Grind Fantasy is giving us, they're saying that it has a 50.8% chance of hitting when the books are giving it an average juice of minus 119. Now, looking at recent performances and how he's done last 5, last 10, he has hit 4 out of his last 5 and 5 out of his last 10. Now, looking at how Memphis defends the center position these last couple games, 5 out of the last 7 centers that have faced Memphis have hit their over and have made at least 50% of their shots in those games. So if we look at how Carter has done in his last 5 games, he averages 65% field goal percentage. In games where Carter hits at least 50% of his shots, he has hit the over in 24 out of 30 of those games. So he's been highly efficient in his last 5 and 10 games. And Memphis has been very bad in their last week versus centers. So again, looking at that matchup, now if you look at how Memphis is versus centers, very dominant. They're one of the best teams versus centers, allowing the second least amount of points. But again, we are only asking for 12 points out of Wendell Carter, who has been very dominant in this Orlando Magic team here recently. But anyways, guys, these are my 6 picks. We are looking for that 25 times multiplier on PrizePicks. Now, before you leave, like I said earlier, make sure you are checking the links in the description to make sure you are becoming a better sports bettor. But also don't forget to subscribe to this channel, hit that notification bell, and be notified anytime we are dropping a new video, which they are coming out daily. Anyways, best of luck to you today. Let's go 6-0.